They say family is where you're loved the most, but what if it's the place where you're hurt the deepest? You can forgive a stranger. You can walk away from an acquaintance. But when the wound comes from the people who share your blood, it leaves a mark you can't wash away. For years, she stayed quiet. She supported them. She made their lives easier. And all she asked in return was respect. Until one night, under crystal chandeliers and polite applause, her mother called her useless. Her father told security to escort her out, like a stranger. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She walked away. And in that silence, she began to plan something her family would never forget. If you've ever been hurt by the people you trusted most, this story will stay with you long after it ends. Like, share, and subscribe. Now to HT Family Drama, family stories that stay with you. Don't forget to turn on notifications for more emotional family stories every day. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones we live through or never dare to tell. They say family is where you're loved the most, but some people whisper the opposite. That family is where the deepest wounds are made. I'd heard that saying before, but I never thought it would apply to me. Not until that night. The city shimmered like a necklace of diamonds laid across the dark. Street lamps cast soft halos over the sidewalks, headlights slid by in silver ribbons, and the August air was heavy with the scent of warm asphalt after a brief rain. I pulled up to the Waverly Hotel, the most prestigious venue in town, the kind where your name has to mean something before the valet even pretends to smile at you. Tonight was Margaret's night, my sister, my parents' pride and joy. 50 years old and celebrated as if she were royalty. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, refracting light across polished marble floors in scattered prisms. Gold-trimmed mirrors multiplied the glow, while tall arrangements of white roses breathed their perfume into the air. Somewhere beyond the double doors, a string quartet played a piece I vaguely recognized. Something elegant, designed to sound effortless, but requiring skill beyond imagining. I smoothed the skirt of my navy dress, chosen after hours of deliberation, not too loud, not too plain, enough to show respect without competing for attention. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to wish my sister a happy birthday and quietly slip away. Inside the ballroom, laughter rolled in waves. Glasses clinked in a delicate rhythm. The guests, an assortment of old money, corporate faces, and family friends, floated between tables like chess pieces in slow, calculated moves. Some recognized me. Their smiles were polite, but there was a flicker in their eyes. Curiosity tinged with judgment. Others barely glanced my way as though I were a shadow in a room full of light. And then I saw her, my mother, perfect posture, a sleek chignon with not a strand out of place, the kind of pearls that weren't bought but passed down, catching the chandelier's light with every subtle turn of her head. From across the room, she radiated grace, but up close, there was an edge to her smile, like the glint of a knife beneath silk. She reached me in 3 precise steps and placed her hand lightly on my elbow. The touch was soft, but there was steel in her grip. "Try not to draw attention tonight, Eleanor," she murmured. I kept my tone even. "I only came to wish Margaret a happy birthday. That's all." But before I could take another step toward my sister, my mother's voice carried, sharp and deliberate, slicing through the hum of conversation. "You've always been useless. Just stand in the corner and don't embarrass us." The room seemed to pause. The violin faltered for half a beat. A glass hit the table a little too hard. Someone cleared their throat and looked away, feigning sudden interest in their phone. And then my father's voice, cold, clipped, and final. "She's not welcome here." A man in a black suit appeared. Hotel security. He didn't need to say a word. His presence was enough. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I turned and walked out, heels striking the marble floor in sharp, unbroken beats. Every step was heavier than the last. Every step carved the moment deeper into me. A memory I knew would never fade. Outside, the night air hit me like a sudden exhale, cooler than the ballroom, carrying the faint mingling of ocean salt and roses from the hotel garden. It should have felt refreshing, but instead, it only made the knot in my chest tighter. I crossed the valet lane without waiting for anyone to open the car door for me. The click of my heels softened on the cobblestones, replaced by the dull thud of my heart in my ears. Sliding into the driver's seat, I let my hands rest on the steering wheel, unmoving. I wasn't ready to start the engine yet. For years, I had been the quiet one, the dependable one, the problem solver who operated behind the scenes, smoothing over conflicts before they grew, stepping aside so others could shine, and never asking for thanks. It was easier that way, or so I thought. I told myself it didn't matter that my contributions were overlooked, that it wasn't important if my name was missing from the credits, as long as the family's image stayed polished. But tonight, my parents had dragged that image through the mud themselves, and they had done it with my name. I pulled my phone from my clutch and opened my banking app. My eyes skimmed through the list of accounts. Joint accounts, travel funds, corporate expense cards, all under my name. Not because it had to be, but because they had said it was easier that way. If I was truly as useless as my mother claimed, they wouldn't miss what I was about to take back. My finger hovered over the first account. Freeze, confirm, another, freeze, confirm. One by one, the numbers locked behind a digital wall. I moved on to the travel funds. Gone. The prepaid villa in St. Lucia for their upcoming, well-deserved vacation. Canceled. The chauffeured cars on standby for the next 3 months, released from contract. Then came the last one, the one they had never truly believed I would touch. I opened my brokerage account, Prescott and Vale Hospitality, the family empire. I owned a $19 million stake, not inherited, not gifted, earned. My buy-ins had come from years of strategic investments, sleepless nights, and deals I negotiated without their help. I tapped my broker's number. He picked up after the second ring. Eleanor, this is unexpected. I want to sell my stake, I said. There was a pause, then a careful, almost hesitant, "Are you sure? That's a big move." "That's the point," I replied, my voice calm, steady. I ended the call before he could say anything else. The dashboard clock glowed 11:47 p.m. My reflection stared back from the darkened windshield. Not the Eleanor who used to compromise, who used to bend so others wouldn't have to. This face was sharper, determined. Tonight I had crossed a line, and I knew I would never cross back. The morning sun crept into my kitchen like an uninvited guest, spilling across the countertop in sharp golden lines. I sat there in my robe, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching the steam rise and curl. My phone lay face down beside me, buzzing every few seconds like a trapped insect. I finally flipped it over. 96 missed calls, 23 from my mother, 37 from my father. The rest, an even mix of Margaret, a few board members, and numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all until the buzzing stopped for a moment, replaced by a sharp, insistent ringtone. My father. I let it ring twice before answering. "You've ruined this family's name," he said without preamble. His voice was low but laced with fury, the kind that vibrates in your bones. All for some petty revenge. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. "You didn't think twice before humiliating me in front of an entire ballroom," I said, my tone even. "Why should I think twice before telling the truth?" "That's not the same thing." "You're right," I replied. "It's not. I didn't have to lie to do what I did." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a click as he hung up. By mid-morning, the building's concierge called. His voice was polite but hesitant. "Ms. Prescott, your parents are in the lobby. They're asking to come up." I looked out the window. The sky was a washed-out blue, the kind that promised no storms, at least not the kind you could see. "Not today, Greg," I said quietly. "Not today." And I meant it. They could rage. They could call. They could pound on the door. But I had already learned something powerful in the last 12 hours. Silence, the kind that comes after years of swallowing your words, could be louder than any scream. A week passed. The calls had slowed but hadn't stopped. At first, they were filled with fury. Then came the guilt-laced ones. Then the so-called reasonable messages, the kind that sound like peace offerings but are really invitations to surrender. I ignored them all. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon that I agreed to meet a man from Frontline Investigates. We chose a quiet corner table at a cafe 2 blocks from my apartment, the kind of place where the hum of the espresso machine covers conversations. He arrived in a dark trench coat, shaking droplets from his umbrella before taking a seat. His eyes were watchful, the kind that measured every word before releasing it. Without ordering anything, he slid a small flash drive across the table toward me. "This came to our office anonymously," he said. "Someone in your family's circle wanted you to have it." I didn't touch it right away. My fingers hovered as if it might burn. Why bring it to me? Because if the information is real, you're the one it concerns most. When I finally picked it up, it felt lighter than I expected, almost insubstantial. But I knew better. Sometimes the smallest things carry the heaviest weight. That night, I sat at my desk, the lamp casting a warm pool of light over the polished wood. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. The first folder was labeled Financial Transfers. Inside were scanned bank statements, lines of numbers, dates, and recipient names. Large sums had been moved from company accounts to Margaret's personal accounts over the last 3 years. The second folder was meeting notes. I scrolled through minutes from board meetings, my name scratched out entirely in certain documents, replaced by vague terms like non-essential contributor. Then came the messages folder, text screenshots, group chats, my mother's name at the top of one thread. "She's getting too involved. We need to get her out before she catches on." Margaret's reply, "She won't. She's too trusting." And my mother's answer, a simple, laughing emoji. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. My stomach was hollow, my pulse slow but heavy in my ears. This wasn't just carelessness or bad judgment. This was deliberate, planned. Shock gave way to something colder. Focus. I opened a new document, began listing everything. Dates, amounts, names. I double-checked, then triple-checked. When I finished, I encrypted the file and sent it to my attorney. The email subject line was a single word: insurance. The first signs were subtle, the kind you might miss if you weren't looking, but I was looking. It started inside the company. In meetings, people hesitated before mentioning my name, as if it were a fragile thing that might shatter in their mouths. The ones who used to avoid my gaze now couldn't seem to hold it, and when they did, I saw it. The flicker of guilt, the discomfort of someone who knows more than they're saying. Then came the press. The first article was a puff piece, the kind you can tell was written with PR money. "Family differences explained as misunderstanding," it read, quoting my mother about how business disagreements had been blown out of proportion. Margaret gave her own statement to a lifestyle magazine. "Eleanor has decided to take time for personal hobbies. We support her choice." I almost laughed when I read it. The careful wording, the deliberate omission of the truth. It was exactly the kind of narrative they'd used all my life. Neat, controlled, devoid of the messy reality. But control has a way of slipping through fingers when the cracks start to widen. Within weeks, old numbers resurfaced. Audit trails that didn't match public statements. Internal memos leaked to journalists I hadn't even contacted. Board members began asking questions in hushed tones, the kind you only whisper when you're afraid of the answers. And I I said nothing. I didn't call a press conference. I didn't post a word online. I didn't even correct the half-truths that floated around in headlines, because I knew something they didn't seem to understand. Sometimes, the best way to win is to let their lies rot from the inside. The smell eventually reaches everyone. And when it does, no one asks if you were right. They already know. The meeting was set for a Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. sharp, at my lawyer's office downtown. Neutral ground, glass walls, no distractions. I arrived early. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee, its long table gleaming under the recessed lights. My lawyer, Martin Hale, sat beside me, calm, unshakable, the kind of man who could make a hostile witness confess with nothing more than a raised eyebrow. At 9:07, they arrived. My father entered first, his jaw tight, shoulders squared as though he were walking into battle. Margaret followed, eyes darting around the room as if cataloging every detail. My mother came last, perfectly put together as always, her expression unreadable, except for the small crease between her brows that told me she hated being here. No handshakes, no greetings, Martin began. We're here to discuss terms for the resolution of certain disputes between the Prescott family members. The word disputes almost made me laugh. That was one way to describe betrayal, fraud, and public humiliation. The terms were straightforward. My full stake in Prescott and Vale hospitality returned. A public statement clearing my name. Repayment of funds within 60 days. There was no room for negotiation. "This is robbery," my father said, his voice low but vibrating with anger. "No," I replied, meeting his eyes without flinching. "This is correction." My mother's lips thinned. Margaret shifted in her seat, her fingers drumming lightly against the table. A tell I'd learned to recognize since childhood. She was calculating, weighing whether resistance was worth the cost. Martin slid the papers forward. "If you agree to the terms, sign here, here, and here." Silence. The kind that stretches long enough for you to hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then, one by one, they signed. No apologies, no admissions, but I didn't need them. The signatures were enough. As they left, my father didn't look back. My mother gave me a single, unreadable glance. Margaret lingered for half a second as if she wanted to say something but then thought better of it. The door closed behind them, and for the first time in months, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Not in uncertainty, but in control. I drove the coastal road home with the windows down, the late afternoon sun spilling gold over the cliffs. The ocean stretched endlessly to my right, waves rolling in steady, unhurried rhythm, as if they'd been doing it long before my family's drama and would keep doing it long after. The wind tangled my hair, carrying the scent of salt and something faintly sweet from the wildflowers along the roadside. Each mile I put between myself and that downtown office felt like shedding another layer of weight I'd been carrying for years. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky was streaked with the warm colors of early evening. Coral, lavender, and the first hints of indigo. I left my shoes by the door and walked straight to the back deck. From there, the view opened wide, the ocean glinting under the fading light. Somewhere far out, a ship moved slowly across the horizon, leaving a faint, white trail in its wake. The papers were signed. The terms were binding. My name, the one they had tried to diminish, was mine again. I thought of everything they had taken from me over the years: time, credit, trust. But as I stood there with the wind in my hair and the sound of the surf in my ears, I realized they had never taken the one thing that mattered most: my will to stand back up. For the first time in a long while, I felt no need to explain myself, to defend, to justify. The truth was out there now, woven into the quiet understanding of those who had seen what happened. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. The horizon seemed endless, the way new beginnings often do. I didn't know exactly where the road ahead would take me, but I knew it would be mine. Unshaped by their hands, unshadowed by their expectations. They had taken years from me. But the rest of my life was still in front of me, and I intended to live every moment of it,